let's talk about books. These are the books I read in July. And it was a lot of fiction, a less heavy reading month. I was in Tulsa, Birmingham, and Atlanta. So I traveled a lot. Mostly fiction, except for 2 memoirs. And I was looking at the stack, and I feel like it's like 2.5 star to 3.5 star books almost across the board. So I thought I would start with the ones that didn't work for me more. They worked a little better. And then, yeah, there's kind of a similarity in these. Ooh, this is better. In these that I didn't quite buy it. This one and this one were competently executed, but overall not quite shimmery glitter glue, super shiny and lovable, and like it didn't grab me. And then 2 over here that were the betterest 2 of the month. So we will start with Dungeon Crawler Carl. Why not? This is a book that is hugely popular. I haven't looked up the full provenance of, it's not really a word for not a physical item, but I think the author published online, on Kindle, on Reddit, something first, and they only got picked up by a major publisher after becoming hugely popular and developing their own fan base, which is pretty cool to be able to do and pretty special. It happens some now. I think about like Ali Hazelwood, I think started as a fan fiction writer, but not super often. And especially at least not that I know a bunch of stories about with like men's books or male writers. So Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. This is a romp, would be the word for it. It is very video game. It's like reading a video game. There are so many books in this series now, and this is the smallest one. This clocks in at like 412 pages. The others are like 800 pages. They just start to look like bricks. And anyway, I like to read a really popular book. I like to see what's going on. I was, in that sense, rewarded with reading this one because usually when I don't think a book works, that's very popular, that's genre fiction, so like thriller, fantasy, romance, it's because the author uses too many words, and this was not one of those books. So it was fun to dislike something for a different reason, or at least that's like the thing that annoys me the very most. So to not have to be annoyed by that while reading, I think is part of what is why I decided to finish it. When with other books that fit this exact same audience, like Will of the Many, I DNF'd it after like 90 pages. So in this story, very shortly into the beginning, Carl has gone outside to chase his girlfriend's cat out of the tree at 3 a.m. and the entire world crunches down. Anything that was interior is obliterated. Because he was outside, he survived, and this giant message comes, like blares across the sky, that's like, some stairwells are going to open up in 5 minutes, and you have 10 minutes to get down in the stairwells to play the dungeon game, and if you don't do that, you can try and survive on the surface. Well, he's like in Seattle in a blizzard, so he cannot survive on the surface, so he has to go into this tunnel, and from there, you are in a dungeon the entire time, which I realized late that it's supposed to be like stone walls with moss, but there was a couple things with the descriptions. He didn't make that description clear enough, I don't think, when he introduces you to the dungeon. He gives you a couple of competing parts that look like other things. So I pictured it looking like Severance the whole time, like office hallways, which is way less interesting and like kind of charming, I guess. But what happens is Carl and his girlfriend's cat become 2 members of a little competing thing, and they have to fight for their lives in what is a survival game broadcast to trillions of inhabitants of the larger alien universe. And if that sounds up your alley, now you know. There were it to me, the reason that I didn't love it is because it was kind of one note. And by the end, many of the battles just felt the same. Like, okay, we're gonna plan, we're gonna read the room, we're gonna fight this way, we're gonna get achievement boxes and open them, and we're gonna be leveled up in our powers. But like times 9. By the end, I was like, okay, I'm not ever gonna read another one of these books. It also was so, if you think about like level 1 as like plot, like what happened, who went where, and then other levels 2, 3, and 4 is like getting deeper, thinking about theme, for example, or anything that's deep and meaningful. Whatever. This book didn't hit theme very well. Every 103 pages, Carl would be having a break, and he would be like, "You will not break me." That became my mantra. And then like go on to killing goblins. And so it was just a little silly. Whereas a lot of the reviewers are like, this is a book with like a lot of action and a surprising heart. I actually don't agree. And then there's this one time, this is a spoiler. Actually, not that good of a spoiler, but okay, the author was really good at picking things that would be charming or interesting. The dialogue was pretty good, and there was a lot of humor in the book. I don't want to say it's funny, like I wasn't laughing, but it was like a good-natured, fun time. So one of the things that happens is Carl comes across a group of people from an old folks home, and they had been evacuated by a fire alarm, and the 3 nurses and the 2 maintenance guys are trying to keep like 30 old people safe in this like incredibly cutthroat, dangerous, bloody dungeon situation, which is a great bit of texture. And if he hadn't done that specifically, it would have made me notice how repetitive it was way sooner. Like that was a really enjoyable part of the book. It gave also different motivations to the characters, because he's not just trying to level up or like kill, but he's trying to protect old people in a system that doesn't want you to care for other people around you. So that was a good moment. There's one of I think it was a nurse, her name is Yolanda, and she dies in a battle, and like it cuts to a new paragraph, and it's one line, and it just says, "I didn't know Yolanda for very long." And it's such a tonal shift from the entire book that it made me laugh. That was the only time I think in the book that I laughed aloud. And then there's 2 paragraphs of this eulogy that was so different from the tone of the rest of the book. And it's so like, whenever you think about someone making fun of like a best man speech at a wedding, but it's like just because you could kind of say what a best man speech might be, like the most basic reductive version, it was like the most basic reductive frat bro eulogy that you could read. And it really, like, I laughed the whole time I was reading it. And that's not the goal. That's not what he was going for. So anyway, there were a couple of times where the wording he used was like weird. He said that the cat, so Carl like leaves the house to go try and get the cat back. And so he's looking up and he's like, the cat was on the tree. But I'm like, a cat is in a tree. And there were some little bitty word mistakes like that were really weird, because usually that's something that's easy to pick up in an edit. So I didn't mark a lot of those. The things that I marked more were like a little bit over explaining, but it was rare enough that, actually it wasn't that rare. It was like every 3 or so pages, which is kind of a high rate. But I think it's forgivable, or at least I was able to finish it because it was at the word level versus the the paragraph and sentence level. So if y'all remember when I really didn't like First Time Caller and what was the other one called? And Now Back to You. It was because it would be a scene where they're having a conversation that was 9 pages and it could have been 3 paragraphs. That is so difficult and annoying. Whereas, like, I had to see if the smoke bomb would remain lit. Thanks to my level 5 explosives handling, this is giving you so much information about the tone of this book. Now when I examined incendiary items, I received some extra information. He's been, like, receiving items and opening little descriptions of them in his brain the whole book. So that was just, like, we didn't need. Now when I examined incendiary items, I received some extra information. It was, like, 1 phrase too many. But that didn't take that long. It's not like it was a whole chapter too many. There was only 1 chapter where they're opening boxes and getting rewards where I was like, this whole thing could have been shorter. But the rest of it was really well paced, and that covers a lot of sins. So yeah, it was a book. I kept thinking about quitting. Honestly, like, I thought about quitting the whole time. And that's not a great recommendation either. But people love it. And as far as a fun book, it will probably be fun if you like a quick pace. If you like something that's tonally light, even though it's thematically heavy. So he's fighting for his life, but it's like a goofy, silly book. And that's if you want to start a really, really long series. I got it for free, which is also why I read it. Scott Smith recommended this one, and it's fun to read. It's gonna try and be so diplomatic. I think it lived up. I think it fit the description that he gave me, and also is something that Scott is more likely to like than I am. All the love to Scott Smith. Okay. These are the 2. I kind of picked a different angle this time because I don't actually remember why. Oh, I only have my normal phone so that I don't think the microphone's very good. So I hope you can hear me. Maybe I should project a little bit more. I also mutter a little bit more than I thought I did, as I have noticed when I edit. And I have not been fixing the captions recently. Let's move on because I thought this was going to be fast and we can still have it be fast. The next book we're going to talk about, I've learned to correct my words, is The Most Fun We Ever Had by Claire Lombardo. This is a author, I think she lives in Chicago. Her books are set in Oak Park in Chicago. That's a suburb. And I heard about this from Lucy, who's a writer. She's a regular at the shop. I heard about it from Book Fair. They read this author's 2nd book for the pod pretty early on, maybe like season 2. And so I had been wanting to read it for a while. I bought it. I read it. I really, really enjoyed reading it. Every time I wasn't reading it, I wanted to be reading it. Every paragraph, you're getting these really, really strong descriptions. Lombardo is so good at doing moments, like a specific moment, telling you how the characters feel, giving you a little bit of observation or wisdom, kind of in the vein of like Frederick Bachman. And I enjoyed it so much. Whenever I stepped back from it, from like being zoomed in and looking at it zoomed out, there was some things that I was kind of just squinting and tilting my head at, plot-wise and character motivation-wise, where I didn't really think certain things worked. I didn't actually believe certain things about certain characters that she made up. And with a novel, one of the most important things is that as a reader, you believe it the whole time you're there. It, for me, was between, I mean, we could say Frederick Bachman, we'll say Jesmyn Ward because I'm going to need that book in a second. Between a really strongly written, character-driven book, stop while you're ahead. This is so good, but we're going to talk about it when we get to Jesmyn Ward in a second. Both of these books are stories, and then while you're reading them, they feel so real, and they have plot, and they have things happening, and there are coincidences, but you believe them, and the characters like each other and dislike each other and hurt each other, and it's like a perfect machine. Every single piece is working, and it's running perfectly quietly, and you just get to enjoy what the author has given you. That would be on this end of the spectrum. Most fun we ever had would be in the middle. And then on this side, I would put like Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano, which is a novel that was really popular 3-ish years ago. Really similar setup, like set in Chicago, a book about many sisters with lots of drama between them, and yeah, so similar in that way. But what didn't work for me about Hello Beautiful was that it felt like paper dolls. Like, it felt like someone was sitting in front of me with paper dolls named Julia and William and was like, oh, they're over here. Oh, they're over here. And it was completely flat. And I never believed that I wasn't reading a book. Like, I never believed they were people. And Ann Napolitano is really good at writing what she calls pretty sentences. And so the reading experience was at the like second by second level totally fine, but overall it was really, really disappointing and honestly ridiculous at certain points to me. She did this thing, this is a little spoiler, it's an old book though, so that's fine, where every time a character was born, a different character died that same day. Multiple times. And this is not like a fantasy book. It's just a book set in the real world. So like the dad has a heart attack and dies, and then the daughter like goes into labor and births her baby in the same like day in the same hospital. And then this other person dies, and then this long lost daughter shows up that very same day and like joins the family. And it was so manipulative because you don't believe a coincidence if the author needs the coincidence. That's a George Saunders, I think that's in here, Brain Dead Megaphone by George Saunders. The inverse, you're giving the author like how bad they need something to happen is inversely related to how willing the reader is to believe it. And yeah, Hello Beautiful is not on the shelf. This one was so much better than Hello Beautiful. And there was one sister where I was like, did she even earn her keep in these pages? There were 2 marriages where I was like, I don't know why you fell in love with her. I don't know why you fell in love with your wife. I don't know if I believe that you were anything but this sort of side shade to provide a little bit of different light on this thing. And that was frustrating. It was frustrating because the book had so much promise and it was so enjoyable to read and so completely mid. It was long too. It's like 500 something pages and over 600 pages. So one thing that didn't help is it was counterpoint structure. So one chapter would be in the present day, and then the next chapter would be like 1970. So it's a family of 4 or 5 daughters and 2 parents, and they're super in love. And they live in Oak Park. So it's like, oh, we're adult daughters. And then it goes back to 1970 when David and Marilyn, the parents, meet and fall in love. Then it's like adult daughter story again. And then it's like David and Marilyn get pregnant and move to Iowa because he has his residency and she has the baby. And then it goes back to the present day. So you're doing that the whole time, which is not... In The Killing Fields of East New York, it's really destabilizing. It was a huge editorial miss in this book to use counterpoint because how deep to go? So this one follows like I don't know, the FBI and the actual neighborhood of Brownsville or East New York. And then they both timelines start in 1970, and you're switching back and forth between the two like topics. But one of the timelines stays in 1970 the whole time, basically, and then the other one like shoots through 40 years of history. So it's so confusing because when you get to this point, you're reading about 1970, and then you're reading about 2001, but you cannot keep straight like the policy differences when things are not chronological. It was so important, and I really would love for someone to like physically put this book in a binder and rearrange it and let someone read it that way, because it was really interesting. It had a lot of interesting things to say. This book's counterpoint was not confusing while you read it like that one. It was just something that I wrote in my review. Oh, I needed more room. The counterpoint narrative didn't help. Perhaps it kept the reader from noticing the issue. Perhaps it kept the writer from fixing it. The character arcs can't arc when the timeline bumps you back every 20 pages. And so I wonder if the author, now that she's written more, and I have no major beef with the author, I'm so curious if she put this in a binder and put it in chronological order and read it in that direction, what changes she would make now. But I don't actually, no, I take that back, because I think that in writing, you have to write what you can write at the time, and you have to finish things and put them out into the world. And so I take back that hypothetical, because this was a pretty successful debut. It was a pretty widely loved debut, and it's okay to just debut your best work at the time. As a critic, I think there were points that were flat, and I think the counterpoint didn't help, but let's just like stop there. If you love a family story, a pretty character-driven book, but not one where nothing happens, this could be good. Man, my piles are so unclear. This is the next book we're talking about, so I need to put away my gorgeous fiction and pull out Salvage the Bones, which I love, and I love any chance to talk about. Jesmyn Ward is a writer from Mississippi. She's like the writer laureate of Mississippi, by which I mean there are certain authors that you associate really strongly with a specific state, like, for example, Kentucky, Wendell Berry. And mine for Mississippi, in addition to Kesey Lehman, who has work in here, but I have his memoir over there, I haven't read it yet, is Jesmyn Ward. Jesmyn Ward wrote Salvage the Bones. This was on Roxane Gay's Top 10 Books of the Century. Therefore, I bumped it way up my TBR and read it, as was The Amazing Adventures of Claudia Clay, which was also amazing. This book is so great. It is set in Mississippi, and in some senses is inspired by Jesmyn Ward's experiences and observations about Mississippi. I wouldn't call it semi-autobiographical, partially because I don't like really applying that to much fiction at all, and partially because the female protagonist of this one is very distinctive and different from Jesmyn Ward in some really significant ways. This book works. This book tells the story of Esh and her 4 brothers. They live in rural Gulf, Mississippi, and it's like the 10 days leading up to and the day of and day after Hurricane Katrina in their town. And so then I read Men We Reaped, which is her memoir. It came out 2 years after. I think it's 2011 and 2013. And then she has another book. So Where the Line Bleeds was her first book set in Delisle, which is in the fictionalized version of Delisle. Then this one was the second, and it won the National Book Award. Then she published Men We Reaped, and then she published Don't Let Us Descend, Sing Unburied Sing. Yes, which is the third. Okay, why do you need to know that? Maybe you don't, because I've only read 2 of them. And when I had a favorite fiction section, this was in it. There is a moment in this that, like, I could just say the hair clip. Devastated. I'm still devastated by the hair clip. Also, one of the brothers in this book is like one of my favorite literary characters of all time. I love him so much. When I finished this book, I was like, I need 4 brothers now. And it's great. Then I read Men We Reaped. This is Jesmyn Ward's memoir. I have also read other things by Jesmyn Ward because she is an author about town. She had an article in Vanity Fair or something that was so brief and so devastating. She writes and lives in Mississippi, and she was married and she has 2 kids, I think 2 kids, and her husband died of COVID in January of 2020. And that story and the way she wrote it and the way she connected it to the themes that she's explored throughout her life, poverty in Mississippi, racism, and what 2020 meant for us as a country, the pandemic, it was so great and so terrible. There are times where I will recommend a short form of something over a long form, like Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener. She wrote a New Yorker article, then she wrote a book, both of which are kind of about Silicon Valley, and I kind of felt like after finishing the book, the New Yorker article would have been fine. I lean towards recommending the Jesmyn Ward article because it does something that for me this book did not quite do. Also, Jesmyn Ward's fiction is so phenomenal that if you're only going to read one, I would do Salvage the Bones or any of her other fiction that I haven't read and cannot recommend. This book is about men that she grew up with, I think 4 of them, and 5 young men who were all close to her. One of whom was her brother, maybe a cousin, and some friends. They all died in 4 years between when she was maybe 16 and 20 or something. And so it is the story of that. At the beginning, she announces a pretty formally interesting choice, which is she's going to tell the story of her life going forward through time, and then the story of the deaths going in reverse. But then the promise of that interesting structural decision is not delivered on, and I think it obscured some of the impact the book would have been able to have, especially because her brother's death is the final one that she writes about, but the first one that happened, I'm pretty sure. So what I sense might be the case is that is an interesting way to write a book if you are in mourning, because you have to make sense of who you are as someone who is broken and hurt, and you have to face these deaths that are completely devastating, and you want to do it in an order that will not crush you, so you save your brothers until the end. I think that makes so much sense. I don't think this worked as something that was rich in the reflection that you want from memoir. So the question with memoir is not what happened in the author's life, it's why is anybody else reading about what happened in the author's life? And this book was very strictly a eulogy. To me, it read very much like a list of stories about boys who were killed and died way too soon. I didn't think there was enough else there to make it something extraordinary in the way that Jesmyn Ward has made other pieces of writing extraordinary, including her fiction and including the article she wrote about the death of her husband, which is so much more devastating when you know that. So I honestly wouldn't recommend the book. I think it's okay for someone to write something important to them, and that's my take. Also, at the sentence level even, Salvage the Bones was stronger. There were sentences that would be confusing or just not worked back over. Also, there was a really interesting piece about, she was writing about where she was from. She's at Stanford and she goes there for undergrad, and then she goes to Michigan for grad school, then she moves to New York City, I think is her trajectory over the years that these men are dying. And she comes back for Christmas or something and is talking to some of her friends, one of whom is one of the ones who dies, and she's talking about her stories, and she says, but they weren't working. She's talking to the reader. I was a benevolent God, and I was realizing as I was around the people that I grew up with that I was sanding off their edges in fiction and being benevolent towards them, and I needed to be an Old Testament God. Like, she needed to learn to like smite these characters and let bad things happen to these characters. And that's one thing that I will be reading a work of fiction and I will be like, I do not have what it takes to do what that author just did to this person that they love so much. And so I loved hearing her articulate that. And also, like, I'm not interested in writing fiction, but it was cool to hear it as something learnable or something that she realized she had to change. And then that goes back to this, what we talked about, which is the hair clip. Like, there are things in this book that fit that so strongly. So there were a lot of really beautiful stories and thoughts in here. Now I'm thinking about that again. Okay, slow down. The next book, is this it? These 7? Okay. The next 2 books we're talking about are both like specific genres. We've got a YA fantasy, first in a series of 5, and a romance, second in a series of 3. We'll talk about The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater first. This one is like a combo of any prep school YA book, like Ace of Spades, plus Gallagher Girls, plus anything with a little bit of fantasy. It did a couple of things differently from a lot of classic YA books that made it really interesting. I'm like being weird because I have to stand up and get you the other book she wrote. Hang on. This is a more recent book. Maggie Stiefvater wrote The Raven Cycle, which is 5 books, and then she wrote The Listeners. I thought this was a 5-star read. I thought it was so cleanly written and so interesting, and so I went back to The Raven Boys, which Emma Reads Too Much also loves, and I love her writing about books. She's on Substack and Goodreads. So I read it. A couple things it does interestingly. One, the prep school is just a prep school for boys, but one of your main characters is a girl who lives in the town. Interesting thing number 2, your main character boys live at this loft machine factory off campus. So it separates them a little bit from the politics and from the mahogany and the hallways and the carpets in a way that gives you a different edge. And I thought she moved between the different characters pretty deftly. It was a little bit of the, this happens, I don't know if it happens more in YA and YA specifically, but I noticed that Ace of Spades was this way so much, where the beginning of the book is kind of just people like walking around for like 120 pages, and sort of gleaning information. It wasn't super bothersome. It was really engaging book, and the characters were great. And Blue, the girl main character, lives with her mom and then like a bunch of wacky like witchy aunts in this house, and they're literal psychics, and the boys are trying to find, I don't know. It was entertaining and a fun read. To me, this is a fun read, whereas Dungeon Crawler Carl was a fun read, but not for me. I don't think I'm going to read the second one. I was really torn, and then the shop returned them because Olivia tragically has moved away from Chicago and will not be. It was her rec and her one that she sold a lot. So I'm very like, the books come to me if I am to read them. And this feels like it's going to be like City of Ember was a couple months ago, where I finish it and I'm like, I would totally read book 2, and then I don't. Something I have learned from in a book we will talk about next month, which after finishing, I immediately ordered the second one because I wanted to remember that I really wanted to read the second one and actually read it. Yeah. There was a twist in the Raven Boys. I'm just going to say the character's name, Noah. That was crazy. It was crazy. And that's fun. Yeah. Also, yeah. Promise Me Sunshine by Cara Bastone. I read Ready or Not by her. I find these covers so, they just that one's too far away. They really hit, like, that's what I want to look at. The Ready or Not one is even more so. So that one, I think we ordered too many on accident, so I got to read it. I read it, I was like, that was good. And then it kind of settled in, and I was like, I love that book. That was so good. So I read No Matter What last month, I think, and that one was pretty good. It was the third book in the series. This is the second one. If you're like, how does a romance have a series? Because the only thing that you cover is like two people getting together. It's just they're friends, people they vaguely know. And because I read 1 and then 3, I didn't know that they were connected really, and I didn't expect the character from 1 to show up in 3, and I fully gasped. It was fun. Weird to kind of go in and fill in. I really like Bastone's writing. I like her tone. She doesn't ever use too many words. She doesn't ever miss up physical reality, which is an Emily Henry thing that drives me crazy. And so, this was not as much my favorite as the other 2, partially because it went slowmance so hard. So like, in a romance, they are stumbling and fumbling and sort of slowly realizing that they will end up together. You know it the whole time. So it's a very fine calibration the writer has to do of keeping it interesting. And this one, I made up the term slowmance, I think after finishing this one, or maybe the one before it, where it's like, there's so much character transformation and there's so much else going on that they really don't like have a romantic connection until very late in the book, which is, I think, just nice to know going in. I don't think it's necessarily always a bad thing. And this one, it was very slow. The plot is that the female main character is a nanny in New York City. And I do think it's fun to read books about very normal people in New York City. Like, not even, I want to work in publishing, I want to be a writer normal. Just like, I'm a nanny, I'm a bricklayer, I'm a mechanic, I work at food banks. I think that's fun. I like that in a romance. So if you think about the genre, there's sort of like, I don't want to say aspirational, but like sports romance, where your main character is like dating the star of an NFL team, or billionaire romance. I don't really think those are that fun. My issue with the unreality of that makes it like less of a trope I'm interested in, was something that made this one a little less fun, which is the main character's mourning the death of her best friend who died of cancer. And Miles, the male main character who ends up being the boyfriend, is the nanny kid's like uncle or something. And he basically is like her grief coach through the whole book. They kind of have this setup where she's like, I'll help you know how to like be a good uncle and talk to the 7-year-old, which is what he wants. And he's like, I'll help you through this grief, which is like completely overwhelming you. And there was a lot of really great writing about grief, but it didn't feel realistic in a way that made it a little bit, I thought, less fun. There's some lines in here that were just great, and it was a fun read, and that's, I think, all you need to know. 2 left. Oh my goodness. Is that real? I'm like, okay, 2 more for July. Everything Sad is Untrue, and no one is talking about this. Let's start with this one. This is by Daniel Nayeri. It is a memoir. My dad told me about it, and so I ordered it, and it was pretty great. It was so, I don't know if I want to say so unusual in the style, because what I will say, basically, like, there are sometimes people explain books in a way that is like a marketing thing. Like I was saying, I don't like saying this is like autobiographical fiction. It just pigeonholes it weirdly in a way that I think makes it less expansive than it otherwise could be. The pigeonhole of this is people say he wrote, well, but do I want to tell you? I don't. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Okay. This is a memoir. And one thing about it that was really strong is it comes off as oral storytelling. And that can be really hard to do in a written format. And it almost 100% of the time totally worked. There was a little bit of thing that was a little confusing where he's in like 3rd grade or 5th grade or something, and he's presenting to the class about Iran, where he immigrated to Edmond, Oklahoma from. And I couldn't tell a couple of times if he was presenting to the class over the course of one day, or like, is the whole book set at this one presentation or at this grade, or that was a little unclear, but it didn't detract really. So otherwise it was so cool. And then it was also really cool because he's telling the story of his family, but he always says like a patchwork memory is the shame of an immigrant or something. So the idea that you're telling these stories that you can't verify, that you can't fully remember, you're telling pieces of things and you can't verify, like the way that he explains, he'll tell a story, but he'll also explain, I'm not sure that this happened this way, or he's like, I remember this, and it could just as well be this other thing, but like that doesn't actually change the truth of the story, which is like my grandfather loved me and whatever. Or sometimes he will tell a story one way and then he'll find out later that it was very different, and that is also meaningful, and that's also the way that life is sometimes. Like we tell ourselves stories as a kid and believe them, and believe, you know, there's one about like his grandfather killed an oxen for him because it was his only grandson coming to visit. It's a big deal. But then he asked his mom about it later in the book, and his mom is like, no, the village people brought that oxen to your grandfather because he was mad and he was going to kill people and like gore them with his horns, and your grandfather was the one who could put it down and kill it. And so his whole life he's been like, I killed this innocent ox just because I existed. And he like watches it happen as a 5-year-old. It happens when he's like pulling up to the house. And then he receives like this new and different truth. So a story that can be telling you a story and commentating on what it is to tell a story, and archive and memory and language. He talks really interestingly about the language that he knows and speaks with his father on the phone, because his mother, him and his sister immigrate together. His father stays back in Iran. If it wasn't for Ferdowsi, the poet, my dad says, we wouldn't even have Farsi. Look at Egypt, look at Syria. They don't speak Egyptian anymore. They don't speak Syrian, but not us, because we had the Shahnameh, Ferdowsi's epic poem. We had that and could hear the beauty of the Persian language. He told the history of the Persian people and blended it back into legends and then myths. And so it was super effective. I thought it did what it was trying to do. There were so many things and themes I'm really interested in. His mother becomes a Christian, and that's why they have to leave Iran, is because she gets a fatwa put on her and will die. The way they escape is via a couple of miracles, and he tells them to you, assuming that you won't believe that they're miracles, which was so effective and so interesting. And I thought that he engaged with the religion of it all really interesting, in a way that would be interesting to any reader, and that avoided a lot of the pitfalls that I often see in Christian-y or Christian like pushing books that really bother me. It also has interesting points about like the church once he gets to America. Yeah, so I thought this was pretty great. It's largely set and sort of told from his voice as a kid. So from when he's 5 to like 9, basically. And I thought that worked. So yeah, I would recommend it. One more. Okay. This is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. She is one of those writers who I felt like I should have read and I hadn't. And this is often called the great Twitter novel. I was never on Twitter, and yet I live in a world largely sort of created by Twitter. So it is a book that manages to read almost like I imagine scrolling a Twitter feed feels. Very short sections, very skippy back and forth between different topics, but also topics of different seriousness. And I think it's really hard to simulate something as new and weird as scrolling infinity on a phone and all of the randomness that hits you when you do that, the way it feels to your brain. And I think she did it really effectively. Her main character is someone who went a little bit viral and now kind of travels around as like not quite a social media personality in the way that we think of like a trad wife, but someone who's speaking about social media and stuff. And that part, from what I understand, including a note in the back, is what I have been avoiding saying, but was probably thinking about because of this book, semi-autobiographical. Her other book that I've heard of called Priest Daddy is a memoir. And so it would be interesting, kind of similar with like a Catherine Lacey kind of thing, to read fiction and nonfiction by the same writer. One of them where they're saying, this is me. One of them they're saying, this is not quite me. That's interesting. I mean, we talked about that just now with Jesmyn Ward too. So in the first half of this book, your main character is scrolling Twitter, basically. You get introduced to a couple of her people in her life. She has a husband. She has a sister. In the second part of the book, her sister, well, in the first part, you find out her sister's pregnant and they're talking about the baby. And then her sister's baby has a birth defect of, I don't remember what it's called, but it's the one where you have the gene where you never stop growing. And so the baby is basically going to be born and then die within weeks, very soon after. And so that serves to yank our main character and our story into the real world. Yet it still keeps the same formal structural decision of short little paragraphs. I am going to read you the language, my review, sorry. The language was shifting and supple, and all of that worked to characterize our narrator. Part 2, entered into the real world via baby niece, came as a surprise, but it worked to let the narrator understand humanity as something that, like the portal, is what they call Twitter in this, understand humanity as something that, like the portal, is infinitely interesting while simultaneously being repetitive, but real and in a different way from the portal. So basically, you read the first part of the novel and you feel like you're on Twitter with the seriousness and the humor and the repetition of something that is both different every single tweet, like every single time is different, but also the same. And then she takes you to a baby, and having an infant is that same experience. It's something that's really, really repetitive and also really varied, and like every instant of being around an infant can be different, even though they're really just like feeding, eating, and sleeping. So that was pretty impressive and a pretty cool thing to pull off. And the final two words, irreverent and profound, is a really niche combo. And it sounds like a very Patricia Lockwood-esque combo. Her acknowledgements mentioned both a presentation she gave at the British Museum that she is like, the main character in the book gives a presentation at the British Museum. Patricia Lockwood in her acknowledgements is like, thank you for letting me do that. There's never been anyone less qualified than me to do that. And in the book, there is the baby with the elephant man syndrome. And in the acknowledgements, she talks about her, I don't know if it's a niece or someone who has that. More information about Proteus syndrome can be found at proteussyndrome.org. Yeah, to my sister and brother-in-law who let me share in her life. So there are some pieces of that she pulled from her world, and to then turn it into something that works as fiction, you've heard me say it a million times, is really special to get to watch, and it really worked. So although I didn't love it, I didn't feel connected to it, I didn't like adore it, it worked as a piece of fiction and was one of the top 2 books of this month, along with this memoir. Not much else to say. Thank you for watching. I will see you sometime soon. I had Teddy in town before I went to Atlanta, and then Birmingham, and then Pell City. And she helped me build some shelves in my closet. So now, if I'm so inclined, I can go to the closet to get the books that I don't like that I reference and show them to you, unlike just the books that I do like that I reference and pull down. So that's exciting, but it lessened the amount of space I have for books in my closet because they were stored like this before. So the next video might be an unhauling video where I actually get rid of books, which I don't like to do. So if you could see the rest of this table, you would see piles of books I need to go through. Okay. Happy summer.